Let's see. It appears we are live. Hello to everybody in the chat. You guys know who I am. I'm Bear with BearIndependent.com, founder and CEO of Refuge Medical, Refuge Training, president of Grindstone Ministries, and Caleb House. And we are joined today with Ben from Suspicious Observers, who is an incredibly smart and talented young man. And he's going to tell us all the reasons we got to move to the mountains and not die when the world ends. Hi, Ben.
Hey, Bear, how's it going?
Tremendous, brother. How are you today?
I have no complaints.
Roger that. So the format today is we're going to do this for about 60 minutes. A week ago or so, I put a list of questions, or I asked the Patreon members for a list of questions. I've got some of those printed out here, and we're going to look at those. But I wanted to take a moment first to get to know you a little bit better, kind of the guy behind the camera, because I've heard, eyes open, no fear, stay safe, everyone, like every night before I go to bed, because my wife watches your videos religiously. But tell us, like, who are you? What are you about? How did you get onto this?
So I have classical training that would normally make me something between an agent and a slave of the Matrix. I have a background in science and economics due to a lack of direction. I also have a law degree. This was long before I knew what the heck I was supposed to be doing on this planet. And turned out I was very good at analyzing business deals, all the different aspects, the legal, what we were investing in, the economics of the deal. And after a while, I got sick of making very rich people much, much richer. I decided, well, I'm just going to do the same kind of research I do for them, just on stuff that interests me. That's where a little bit of luck came in. I was like, all right, well, what am I interested in? I'm interested in weather, I'm interested in earthquakes, and I'm interested in the sun. And didn't take long to realize that people who watch the sun don't watch the weather. People who watch earthquakes don't watch the sun. There's no crisscross between any of these things. Because if there was, all the stuff I talk about would have been known decades ago. But it became readily apparent even to children in school that these things are all connected. The sun affects the weather. The sun affects earthquakes. The sun affects our biology, how we feel, our physical health. And unfortunately, the earth is changing in such a way that the sun is going to be very impactful on our way of life here in the coming years, maybe at most about 2 decades.
So one of the things that has jumped out to me, because I'm a person of deep faith, even if I'm, a reformed, satanic heavy metal drummer and all this stuff. And I've was a total scumbag back in the day, and by the grace of the Father was able to turn my life around. And you talk about, and I would appreciate the explain it like I'm 5 version, because I'm not as smart as you are when it comes to this stuff. But you talk about with the magnetic pole shifts, how the Earth stands still, and the sun will basically stay stationary in the sky, right? And that when the kinetic energy of the Earth, when it stops turning, the water continues to turn, which causes mass flooding around the planet. My question is that something that's a guarantee? Does that happen every time that you know of? Or is that, a roll of the dice? Because in the book of Joshua, the 6th book in the Bible, there's an instance, regardless of how much historicity you apply to the Bible, there's a lot of archaeological support for the fact that many of the things, if not most of the things in there, were at one time historically true. They happened. So Joshua talks about a period of time where the sun stood still in the sky for 24 hours, a full day. And now, granted, they're in the desert, but there are bodies of water around there, and there's no account of any flooding that occurred from that. And so that compare-contrast between what you say and what I find in the book of Joshua made me wonder if there's 100% probability that when the sun stands still in the sky, it floods, or is there a less than 100% probability with that?
So let's take one step back from there. The most important evidence that we have is that if you look in the Arctic, and there's actually a couple other places in the world this applies to, but it was first discovered in the Arctic that there are these layers of fossils. One is polar fossils, tropical fossils, polar fossils, tropical fossils, indicating that the world goes back and forth, back and forth. And so the waves hit different places every time. If a place took the Great Flood last time, there's a greater chance of them getting fire this time. If they got the fire last time, there's a great chance of them getting the water this time. During that last shift, there were floods in a lot of different places, but there are places in the world that didn't get flooded. Like, for example, high in the Appalachian Mountains of the United States, very unlikely that they got a lot of flooding. On the other hand, the Pacific broke through the Rockies and, washed through the center of the country and down into the Gulf of Mexico. We're going back the other way this time, putting the Appalachians in the center of the country more at risk, and the Rocky Mountains are less at risk this time. In terms of places near Israel, Egypt, and where most of the Bible is taking place, it's one of the axis points of the earth actually tilting a different way. And so there and the Central Pacific, just astride off Hawaii, are the two places in the world where it's not actually changing latitude. The world is just spinning. I mean, if you take a globe and you go like this, there's two sides of the world where it's not changing latitude. It's just turning like that. And, one of those happens to be the area close to Israel, Egypt, other things like that. They're in the perfect position to see that sun standing still in the middle of the sky for a day, which is about how long this shift takes place. Luckily enough, those areas are least likely to get the terrible flooding because of the fact that they don't change latitudes. The water has momentum. It's not locked to the crust. And so when the earth goes in a different direction, we got the water here, land here. If land all of a sudden goes like this, the water's still going like this and goes over top of it. But if you're just spinning like that, it actually makes it much less likely for you to get the major flood. Whether that means for certain that those areas won't be flooded this time, it's tough to say. But it all pretty much happens at the same time. And so different parts of the world report different things. There's another part of the world where there are Aboriginal stories of the long night, the night they thought was never going to end. It was getting colder and colder and colder, and they thought they were all going to freeze to death. And then, several hours later, the sun did appear. So they were on the opposite side of the world from the people who saw the sun standing still in the sky. It does happen, all is one, but it also doesn't mean that story from the Bible is not true. I absolutely believe it's true. In my playlist on these disasters, in my books on these disasters, I rely heavily on the Bible and several other ancient stories as well. People from India have 4 of these stories in their texts. Aboriginals have stories of these things. So I rely on a lot of these things, but a lot of it is found from the Bible. As a man of science, math, and statistics, I have to actually look at how much corroboration there is from the Bible and other stories like that to what's actually happening now and what the physics tell me is about to happen, and say, that's too many things lining up to just ignore. It's almost as though math, science, statistics have begun to blend with this. And when you think about the fact that these stories were written, 2,000 years ago, hundreds of years ago, things like that, it makes you realize, okay, these people who had our equivalent of maybe a first or second, grade education, they did a pretty darn good job explaining what is exactly happening now and what's going to happen. And so it's, I would say that there's more than just a measure of truth in these stories. I'd say that they're pretty darn close to the best history that those individuals were capable of communicating to us at that time.
Do you find a high level of difficulty balancing faith or spirituality or however you believe as compared to your highly logical and analytical brain? Are they at odds, or do they support one another?
They certainly used to be at odds. They certainly used to be. I was never, I can't say I was ever a Satanist metal rocker, But in my young 20s, I was agnostic, moving towards atheist. But like I said, over time, the more that I've seen what's happening in the world, not only in the natural science world, but what's happening with people's brains, what's happening in culture, politics, and in the social world. And based on, again, the physics and the math of where these things lead to in the natural world, I'm like, this is all written in this book. It's gotten to the point where you don't have to choose anymore. In fact, to say it's one or the other, you have to ignore an enormous amount of facts. And so for me, it's becoming easier every single day to marry those two things and see that it's really the same story told from two different perspectives.
That's super cool because I agree with that. I think that in many ways, what we read and experience in the Bible, at least for me, the Bible, that's my sacred text, right? For millennia, religion and science have been at odds, and I'm like, they're just different sides of the same coin. It's I think in many ways, science is humanity trying to apply our brain power to understand these things that we might experience as God or the hand of God or the supernatural experiences, trying to quantify those things. I find it super interesting that there's, it sounds like a fairly high rate of survivability in the place that the Father says, hey, when shit hits the fan at the end of an age, this is where you want to be. That's coincidence, I'm sure. Also, you bring up the physiological effects that the sun has on the body. That's something that I've personally experienced and have become more aware of because of your channel. I've had days where my wife and I will be working out in the garden. We were talking about planting potatoes off air earlier. We were doing that maybe a week ago when all that stuff, ejecta from the sun, was taking place and all that. And I stopped and I asked my wife because I was getting tingly all over my body. I'm like, what the hell is going on today? She's like, oh, you didn't watch Ben. There's stuff's happening, And so I went and sat under the metal roof on my porch and almost instantly felt better. And I'm like, that's freaking odd, man. So I've become much more aware of that in the last year or two from paying attention to the things that you're saying and how my body is responding to these undeniable changes that the sun is undergoing. And I don't think that most of science, or at least that I'm aware of, is aware of those things or is talking about those things. Do you find that the scientific community is coming more towards your position on this stuff, or are you still the far lone outcast on the far end of the spectrum?
Well, so with the physiological aspects, it's very different from, say, the science on how the sun affects our weather. That one's going up against an unfathomably enormous and expensive political paradigm, based on blaming everything about the climate change on us. In reality, we're about 5 to 10% of climate change. The rest is the sun and Earth's changing magnetic field. And so that one is countered tremendously. When it comes to the physiological aspects, it's just ignored. There's no scientists out there trying to debunk it. The studies are exceptionally robust and well done. They just don't talk about it. They very much ostrich, put their heads in the sand, and they're like, okay, well, we're not going to try to debunk this, but we're also not going to prop it up for everybody to know. But the fact is that these studies have been around. I mean, they started noticing the correlations decades ago, and the scientists who are in this field are now starting to both confirm the statistical correlations and understand the mechanics of how the sun is actually impacting us. And it's everything from our cardiac health, our psychological health, increases in autoimmune disorder events, other things like that, even things down to your basic cognitive abilities and your emotional instability from day to day to day. And these are some of the things that, it's a shame that it's not more well known and not well put out there. From my perspective, because I'm the super nerd who reads all the scientific journals every day, it's nice to see nobody's even trying to debunk this. And I don't even know how they would. Like I said, the studies are exceptionally robust. They're very well done. And so everything from the little ways about who we are and like how who we are changes from day to day to day, like when we're having a bad emotional day and we don't know why, or if we just feel on that day and we don't know why, versus why some days there is, twice the number of heart attacks or strokes or episodes of hospitalizable depression or hospitalizable anxiety or suicide or other things like that. Why there are days when the recorded number of seizures or migraines double or triple. These things are like to the 95 to 99% level correlated with these events on the sun. And it kind of makes sense because the sun impacts how much this can get a little complex, but to make it simple, how much electricity is running through the atmosphere and how much electricity is impacting us as our bodies. And so this affects everything from our brain, obviously. The cardiac system is actually a larger electric engine in the body than the nervous system and the neurological system. And every single thing, every muscle movement, every movement of the eye, every breath, every heartbeat, everything is mitigated by what they call ion exchanges. Everybody's heard of electrolytes, magnesium, sodium, calcium, and all these things we need. Well, they actually are the things that drive the bodily processes, but they're all electrically charged. And so how much electric energy this earth is undergoing, how much we are undergoing, this is why it affects our bodies, and it's why it affects the weather as well. And so it's still hush hush. We don't really talk about this in the scientific community, but if you actually dig deep, you can find that they're doing some fantastic science on this. And if you're a super nerd like I am, you can start to get a pretty good big picture of what's going on here.
I definitely appreciate you being the super nerd that we all need, because you understand this stuff way better than we do. You touched on global warming and electricity, and part of my background is I've put up more than 1,500 wind turbines back in the day, and I've done solar arrays and coal-fired power plants, a couple of nuclear plants, et cetera, more than 1,500 miles of high line. And I got out of that industry for myriad reasons. Lots of travel away from the home all the time, and it was a cool industry. I got to play with some really big toys and manage billions of dollars in projects. But the engineering side of the company that I was working for started asking me to write up some white papers. And for example, why the industry needs to switch to aluminum cable instead of copper cable because of the carbon impact of the smelting of copper, blah, blah, blah. Well, the reason they wanted that white paper was because aluminum cable is cheaper than copper cable, right? And then you dig into that and it's like, turns out aluminum's twice as bad as copper is, blah, blah, blah. And so I started doing all this research and writing these papers and running into these brick walls until I realized that at the time, I don't know now, but at the time, the number 1, 2, and 3 developers of wind energy in the United States were British Petroleum, Dutch Shell, and ExxonMobil.
How about that?
Yeah, they're not oil companies, they're energy companies. And they were diversifying just like, the cigarette companies were when they were getting sued back in the 80s, going into all these different products. And so I got out of the industry, but I'm very familiar with working around electricity. And you can absolutely feel it when you're around live power. You can feel the physiological effects of being around live power. So much so that we were only allowed to work around high voltage energized line for a certain period of time because it was guaranteed you would get cancer if you spent enough time close enough to an energized line. And yeah. I did at the age of 26, coincidence, I'm sure. So all that stuff tracks with me. And the big lie, the big narrative that's being pushed right now with renewable energies as if they're somehow clean and carbon neutral is complete and utter bullshit, because they're not. I know for a fact that every wind turbine I stood up that had a 20-year service life was 38 years until it was carbon neutral. So we're 18 years in the hole for every one that we stand up. So there must have been some other reason that this was being pushed, which leads me to my next question. You brought up the fact that the green agenda, this renewable energy, carbon, the global warming agenda is being pushed in lieu of the solar changes that are taking place right now. How, in your expert opinion, how aware do you think the world's governments are of the things that you talk about, and to what extent do you think that they are quietly preparing and ergo not disseminating that information to us?
They know everything. They know every last bit of it. That was an expansive question. So they are preparing like crazy, and in every way imaginable. This might seem like a machine gun rapid rant here, but here we go.
Send it.
If it seems like they're acting reckless, it's because they know there's not going to be a reckoning. If it seems like they're spending like there's no tomorrow, it's because they know that soon there's not going to be. If it seems like they say one thing but then do the other, and the things that they're promoting don't actually match up when you do the math, like you were just explaining, it's because they know nobody's going to call them on it, and it's not the real reason why they're doing what they're doing. This is everything from them building extra bunkers, to them building extra seed vaults, to them grabbing resources and grabbing land wherever they can, to also making life harder for us. This is everything from the breakdown of the traditional family and the promotion of degeneracy, the attacks against God, and the promotion of Satanism everywhere. This is the intentional deconstruction of the West and all capitalized systems. Part of what you were specifically describing was because they know that there is no future without oil, without fossil fuels, or, you know, I want to say there is a lot of abiotic oil as well, but let's just call them fossil fuels for now. They know that doing this would help to destroy the economy. Same thing they did with COVID. I don't know how you feel about COVID, but the way they handled it was in a way to intentionally destroy the economy. Back in 2020, I made a video which somehow never got taken down. It was called "Millions Are Being Murdered by the Killer Cure," and it's not a cure for COVID. 2 weeks to stop the spread has now become multiple years, and all they did was intubate people and vent people and cause them to die sooner, increase the amount of mental illness by locking us down and scaring the bejesus out of everyone. They collapsed businesses, they collapsed economies, and this caused a huge spike in extreme poverty, a huge spike in mid-level poverty, and other things like that. This is all those things I just mentioned are for one purpose: to put them in the best position and to take us and keep us down and unaware and distracted and struggling while this comes about, so that when it finally snaps, when Earth's magnetic field has its final pole shift and the sun attacks our planet, they are in the best position possible to begin the new age, and we are not.
So I agree with your sentiments on all of that. I've experienced that. I've worked at times in my life for several different federal agencies and peeked behind the curtain a little bit. And suffice it to say, I'm unimpressed with their notional altruistic motives. Negative. Not a fan. So in light of all of that, so, you know, we know that these, I like to call them they, whoever you think they are, the Council on Foreign Relations or the global elites or whatever. They.
We'll go with they. We'll go with they. Them.
The big they.
They use they them.
Well, this light didn't like being there. Well, it's over here now.
The Matrix attacked you.
They are doing everything they can to put themselves in the best position possible. And us little guys are over here trying to decipher what the hell is actually going on and reverse engineer a plan to increase our survivability, whatever may come, right?
Right.
To that point, I'm pretty interested in what you're doing with Observer Ranch, because you may not know, but myself and several other families, we live in what could be called an intentional community. We all own our own pieces of land, but we're all geographically very near to one another. And we work with concerted effort to be a blessing to one another and help advance each other's, preparedness goals. And we fellowship and we do life together, and we willingly pool resources. We go in on deals and all of that. And I love living that way. It's been very beneficial to us. And I like to tell people, you want to build a team that you can hang out with on Tuesday, not doomsday. Like, you should probably like the people that you're doing life with now, because if Tina's an asshole, that's not going to get better when the world ends. It's going to get worse when the world ends, right? So, but we live that way. And because we live that way, we've chosen to live that way. I could live anywhere on the face of the earth right now, and we live here with these people intentionally. It intrigues me what you're doing with Observer Ranch. Could you unpack what you're doing there and how and why for the audience, please?
Sure. There's two parts to Observer Ranch. One is going to be open to the public. It's a public RV campground and education center. We're going to be having Observer get-togethers of all the fans, events, teaching seminars, conferences. But then there's also that intentional community aspect to it as well. We're coming together at everything from supplies to threat assessment to building plans, pretty much everything in that same vein that what you were just describing. And yeah, it's a great way to be. We're a little bit behind where you are if you've already got yours set up, but we're developing that right now as well.
Are you focusing on agriculture and food storage, and like what are some of your courses of action that you're taking there, if you can discuss them?
So there will be a lot of agriculture, both in terms of growing food and taking care of animals. We are going to use some of the more traditional means of food storage, and are looking to try to get creative in some ways as well. We're still working on some of the when the grid goes down energy generation scenarios. Basically everything that you would need if the world went away one day in order to come back up. Everything from growing your own food to defending your castle, put it that way.
So one of the things that, again, I told you off air, one of the things that I wrestle with is I vacillate back and forth between Ben's really smart about this stuff. He knows his stuff, and this is absolutely going to happen, and I need to be ready for it. And my own normalcy biases of like, that sounds pretty terrible. I think I'm just going to plant potatoes instead today, right? And again, admitting my own normalcy biases, right? And so it's interesting for us because, and when I say us, I mean the people that I'm doing life with every day. Everybody that I know is from somewhere else. We have all felt moved by the Spirit, called by the hand of the Father to this place that we're at in Eastern Oklahoma, which, according to you, is going to be a swimming pool when this event takes place. And so on the one hand, I can't deny the fact that we have all been moved here inexplicably, irrefutably by the hand of the Father, felt this calling of the Spirit to be here. And they didn't come here because I'm here. They didn't come here because this dude from YouTube was like, hey, I have an intentional community. We should party. Like, they've all been moved as individuals or family units from all across the country to this one spot right here. And it's hard to deny that fact. And I don't, on the one hand, believe that the Father called us out of the Babylonian systems that we were in, whether it was Dallas or Orlando or Chicago or wherever, to get away from that beast system and come to where we are now. I can't deny that. But I also wonder sometimes, he who can be trusted with little can be trusted with much. Meaning, okay, you were willing to give up your life in Chicago and move to nowhere, Oklahoma, and, sell first aid kits at Refuge Medical and tend to sheep and, do the things that we do. Are you willing to, the next time I say go, if it's flee to the mountains, which is something that Messiah talks about in Matthew chapter 24, are you willing to, the next time I say go, will you go when it's time to flee to the mountains, which is where you're at, right? You're at a much higher elevation. And so like I said, I bounce back and forth between, oh no, everything's going to go to shit super quick and there's going to be 1,000-foot wave. And we're like, honey, pack the kids up, get in the truck. We're headed to the mountains. And like, I'm going to plant potatoes today, because I personally haven't felt the calling from the Father saying, pack your shit up and go. But I do tell my wife on the regular, for myriad reasons, we need to be ready to abandon everything we love, all the work that we've done here, take the things that really matter, us, and strategically relocate, whether that's a weather event or a space weather event, or warheads on foreheads, or the Panamanian paratroopers landed a rifle regiment 3 towns away and they're headed north and they're coming for us, right? I don't know what it could be, but that's what people call their bug out plan, right? Well, right. And so there's all these external factors that could cause one to have to unask the AO. I don't know if at some point the Father's going to say, good, I gathered you all here for a purpose so that you could do life intentionally and build context with one another and learn to love one another here, so that the next time I say go, you will. And I find that super curious, because I'm intrigued by where you live and how you're living, even though the way where I live, at least, doesn't line up with your summation of what's going to happen. Does that make sense?
Right. I hear you. Well, the good news is, I don't think those big things are going to happen until, the timeline I've built is based on math, and the best timeline I have for that is late 2030s to the 2040s. So it's not tomorrow. That's plenty of time to either get a sign to go from the Father or to build something that floats. That's plenty of time. And, that might come in a message too. The message might not be to leave. The message might come, prepare to float, or, prepare to, have everything like that. And so I certainly will not pretend to know the will of the Father or his plans. I'm just trying to have the eyes to see and recognize what his creation is telling us. I'm a believer that, and this confuses people all the time, I'm a believer in creation and evolution. And how that is I believe that the greatest engineer of all would set things in motion and then just let the ball start rolling. He wouldn't create all this, so he had to toy with every single atom and every single thing in existence. That's almost insulting to God to think something like that. And so all these balls are rolling as they were set forth. That is the beauty of nature, math. One of those things is evolution. One of those things is learning from our mistakes and seeing how the world is changing. And so I'm doing my best to have the eyes to see how all of this is playing out and how best I can determine it. And I can tell you, it's gotten a lot easier since I realized how much the science and the religion actually come together in something like this. That's made it a lot easier. I would say that if you guys are all of the mindset that you're there for that reason, have patience. Mm-hmm. I talk to people like that. I also talk to other people who they're wrestling with it because it's like they've built this life somewhere, but they're getting messages. They're getting these feelings that they need to do something else. And it's really just fighting their cognitive awareness versus the fear of uprooting and actually getting into the new situation. And that's a human thing. That's perfectly understandable. It's no different than if God himself appeared before you and said, abandon this land that has been in your family for 4 generations, that you've worked on your whole life, that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into, that is really set up right now. I mean, if he told you to, if God appeared in front of you and told you to go, okay, that might make it a little easier to do so, but that's not how he works, really. It's much more subtle. It's gentle pushes. It's gentle whispers, if I can be metaphoric. It's signs that you see and things like that. And so there comes a point where it becomes really challenging to know which is the right thing to do, because you've got all of the facts, your eyes that can see, and your logical brain telling you, Okay, this is what I need to do. And then there's the child inside who's afraid of the unknown. There's the child inside who's afraid of having to start all over again, or afraid of even feeling the feeling like you've wasted time or you've wasted effort. But then again, that lacks the perspective of what you've learned along the way. And so I hear what you're saying. For people who feel like they have been called somewhere and they can recognize that call, if you haven't gotten another one, maybe it's not your time to go yet. For other people, it's very clear that they've gotten the call and they're letting their inner child stop them from actually doing what they're supposed to do.
We deal with that all the time. We hear from people with that all the time, and it's always fear, right? And you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about people being unwilling to leave because they feel like they've lost something when they leave.
Exactly.
I've been fortunate throughout my entire life to realize I've been highly mobile most of my life. So I've had very little stuff until recently, a house filled with all the trappings of, modern convenience, right? I spent a large portion of my life living out of a big green duffel bag that was in the back of a pickup truck, just driving around the country working. And going to all these new places, right? When you're not tied down by stuff and things and even familial ties, what you're left with is the experience and the opportunities to learn that you've had, right? And so none of that time's ever wasted, and the way I see it is I can get a new house or a tent. I can get more sheep, whatever it may be, right? Another truck, another barn, another tractor. I don't care about those things, really. I can't get another wife and kids. I could, but I don't want to, right? And so at the end of the day, they're my top priority is their provision, protection, blessing, their safety and well-being. And so many people, I agree, have heard that call to uproot their life and go somewhere else, and they're not because of fear, and it keeps them trapped where they are. And I think one of the worst things you can do is deny that urging of the spirit because of fear, rather than stepping into what would very likely be a blessing for you on the other side. Because if God is for us, who could be against us, right? Like if he says go, there's only two options at that point: obedience or disobedience. That's it. And so if you're sitting there in disobedience, wondering why nothing's working for you, because dad said go and you didn't listen. That's why, you brought up, that be like a child. And we were talking offline earlier about kids. And I've got 3 kids, and it's been a challenge for me at times with my 2 older children. They're teenagers. I want them to be educated about what's happening in the world, but I don't want to scare them, because I have seen other folks who are involved in preparedness or whatever you want to call it. I have seen them articulate to their children all the dangers of the world to the point where their kids adopt the mindset that, well, it's all going to hell in a handbasket anyway. What do I care? Why do I have to get grades? Why do I need a career? Why should I get married and have children? And I disagree with that worldview. And so there's this line that I have to walk between educating my children as to the potential dangers of the world and also how blessed they are, while not overexposing them to the bad stuff and the evil so that they lose heart. How have you navigated that with your own children? Because you have kids as well, right?
Right. Luckily, mine are young enough that I don't have to try to tell them too much. They are now 7, 6, and 3. 2 of them have had birthdays in the last 2.5 weeks. In another couple of weeks, they will be 8, 6, and 3. In my mind, that's still too young to tell them how bad things are going to be. But it's not too young to get them outside more. Get them off the video games. 2 days ago, my son and I built a fire pit. And yesterday, I showed him how to make a fire. Taught him how to use a Fresnel lens. I don't know if you know what a Fresnel lens is. It's basically a thing, and it's got all the ribs on it. It basically, you hold it up to the sun, it will direct all the sunlight into one point. Not unlike a magnifying glass, just far more powerful. And so we built the fire pit. I told him why we were building it the way we were building it, why we had to do this on the bottom, why we had to make, 2 rows of this, why it had to be this high. When we were building the fire, I was explaining to him why we couldn't just put, the wood all across the bottom, why we had to keep it towards the center and then build it up towards a point. I taught him so many of these things, including, to have things nearby to put out the fire. And he's only 6, but this was like a magical experience for him. I mean, I think he liked watching the fire more than anything, but still, it's not like he's going to forget everything that he learned in the last couple of days. When it comes to my daughter, we have taken her, looking for berries, looking for fruit in nature, understanding like, okay, hey, this is something that's poisonous. This is actually something where if you were too hungry, you could eat. No, that doesn't mean eat it right now. It just means, things like that. The 3-year-old, it's kind of hard to get into too much of it, but I couldn't tell you what the right age is to actually share some of this stuff with them, especially while, and I'm with you, they need to be maturing in the right way. They need to come up without fear. As long as the world's still turning, they better come home with good grades. Things like that. The other thing is that the older 2 are progressing very rapidly in martial arts. Very proud of them on that one. I think that's something important. When they're old enough, I'm going to teach them how to use a firearm as well, or I may get somebody who's more knowledgeable than me. I think it's things like that. You don't have to jump all the way to the poles are going to shift. The sun is going to kill most of the people on the planet, and the world as we know it's going to end. I think it's a progression up to that.
Yeah, and so there's an age of accountability that I think every child hits, and it's different for each child. Where like a light bulb switches on, where they start becoming aware of more than just themselves, and right. There's a level of stress inoculation for all people that I think is required in order to build the endurance to go out in the world and be profitable, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, educationally profitable. But
right.
You don't want to overdo the stress inoculation, or otherwise they lose hope. And we have one of our companies is a training company, and we teach people the fine art of how to not die. We do civilian we do civilian tactical medicine. And in Responder 3, which is a 10-day course, think about like a 10-hour Spartan race combined with having to do tactical medicine while I'm shooting at you with simulated rounds. Like that, right? And you can always, and the idea is to build stress inoculation in the students so they develop the automaticity to do the things that they need to do to render aid, self-aid, or buddy aid without having to think about it, right? So they can do it under simulated stress, so they can find their own line. And we can watch people. We call it condition black, and it's where somebody's starting to shut down. They start to turn in on themselves, and they just stop. They just give up. And you have to meter the amount of stress that is delivered in such a way that they're continuously being pushed. They're being challenged so that they grow, but they're not so overwhelmed by that external stimulus that they shut down. And it's kind of like parenting in a nutshell, right? Like, I want to simulate the stress. I want to teach them what they need to know. And I want to give them tidbits of the information that they need, give them that external stimulus so that they can grow, but not so much that they just shut down and turn inward and now they're done for. They tap out, they quit the class, and they don't want to play anymore.
Right.
So, shifting gears a little bit, with this catastrophe, what are your primary concerns? Like, when you're at home and it's the end of the day and you're sitting around thinking about this stuff, like, what gives you pause? What are you most focused on? What robs your joy? What keeps you up at night?
First of all, nothing robs my joy. Nothing keeps me up at night. I sleep like a baby all the time. Waking up early all the time, going beast mode in the gym 5-6 days a week, that'll put you down at the end of the day. But I have to admit, it bothers me thinking about how many people I will never reach with this information, or the people who have been exposed to it and can't get past the cognitive dissonance and the normalcy bias. Because this happens repeatedly throughout history. There's a minor event every 6,000 years. There's an even more minor event every 1,500 years. There's a major event every 12,000 years. And unfortunately, that's what we're due for right now. But the one thing I can say is we are still here. Everybody alive today is the descendants of somebody who survived a cosmic attack on this planet. Surviving is in our blood. And unfortunately, what that means is that we all have the capability to do it again, and so few of us will. And part of that is not our fault. It's nobody alive's fault right now that we are so electro-dependent. We are so globalized. We are so needing all of the infrastructures of the world today in order to survive. And we have forgotten so much about how our ancestors actually pulled this off. The greater shame is that it's not that hard to find that information. Luckily, we are in the age of information right now. But to set aside time, and you can't just ignore the rest of the world and just only do this. But the great challenge is, and I recognize this, and I would say, if anything, this bothers me, the fact that parenting is getting harder. Making money and working and living in the world is getting harder. Not going crazy when you see what's on the news and in the government and all this other stuff is getting harder, which means it's getting harder and harder to carve out pieces of time to actually learn what needs to be learned, to actually gather the supplies and preps that need to be prepped, to get the experience with farming or shooting a gun or enduring extreme temperatures or building your own shelter. All of those things are becoming more and more challenging. They're not impossible, but people are becoming more distracted, less incentivized, more stressed, and it's just becoming harder and harder to get access and focus on this information. And that's a lot more people are going to die than have to, unfortunately. If there was a push from the mainstream to focus on things like this, we could save half the species or more. Now I'm worried that it's going to be somewhere closer to that number on the Georgia Guidestones. And so that's something that bothers me. I'm not too terribly worried about myself. I'm not terribly worried about my children. I'm not terribly worried about the folks coming to Observer Ranch. I will drag them kicking and screaming into the new age of Earth if I have to. But I'm worried about a lot of other people who, honestly, if they just knew, they would have a chance to make it. Perhaps they even deserve to make it, and they won't because they are stuck here in the matrix.
So I don't know how familiar you are with our channel, and no offense if you're completely unfamiliar with it, but the reason we have the name Bear Independent is my wife and I were riding in the car one day, and we used to be the Squid and Bear show, and it was a buddy of mine, Squid, who was a Navy vet, and for geographical reasons we moved and he didn't. It couldn't be the Squid and Bear show anymore. And so we're driving down the road, and I'm talking to my wife. I'm like, I have no idea what to call this damn thing. And she said, well, what do you want to do? Like, what's the TLO, terminal learning objective? What are you trying to achieve here? And I said, I want to teach people how to be more independent from this broken, fragile system so that when the system goes away, they don't go away with it, right? And so that's where the concept of Bear Independent came from, is teaching people the old ways, right? Like I can rototill my garden with a rototiller, or I can tear up earth with the skid steer, but a shovel and a hoe will get the job done as well. I have flowing water in my house, but I also have wells and creeks and streams and ponds, and I've got artesian wells on property, and those are natural sources of water, right? I can go to the grocery store and get a piece of meat who comes on a slab of styrofoam with a diaper underneath it, shrink wrapped in cellophane, or I can walk out into my field and I can butcher a sheep and eat that for dinner. And living that out on camera every day, showing people it's totally doable. It's entirely possible. I'm fortunate that I grew up on a farm in upstate New York. And so the physical, visceral, tactile skills required to live this way is something that was imparted into me from birth. I grew up that way. But other than that, I'm not particularly smart or special. I'm probably more stubborn than most people, but that's it. Just like go do shit. Just go start, right? Like dig a hole, put a half a potato in the hole, cover it back up with dirt, eat the resulting potatoes, right? And simple things like that of getting independent of this system, because I don't want, for whatever reason, for whatever external stimulus that causes this super fragile system to collapse, I don't want humanity to collapse with it. And I feel the same burden that you do as far as wanting to reach more people, because I know there's good people out there that are just going to fall by the wayside when this whole thing goes to hell in a handbasket. And I've had to learn that the best that I can do is consistently show up, consistently live and teach and preach that message every day. And some people are going to get it, some people aren't. In my mind, that's in the hands of the Father as to who hears and who doesn't hear. And those that do hear but choose not to listen, I have to absolve myself of responsibility over that person, because I've done everything that I can to make them understand. And if they don't, that's on them. You know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I've got more than 4,000 videos at this channel trying to lead people to water. I know you have a huge body of work trying to lead people to water. If they don't drink, that's on them. It's not on you, you know. But it's that I feel the burden of that every day. And I could tell you feel the burden of that as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we're approaching the end of our time, brother. Is there anything you want to leave the Bear Nation with before we go?
Do you imagine if people spent their free time watching, like split up, watching people like you and watching people like me, and then getting out and doing it, getting the information about the big picture and what to expect, getting the information about the minutia about how to do it, and then going out and learning how to do it. I'm a big believer that this takes, two aspects of knowledge and one aspect of doing. So you have to know the big picture why and the big picture what is coming. Then you have to know what to do about it and how to go about doing those things. And then you have to do it. It's almost like I'm the first one, you're that second one. And then it's incumbent upon all of these people to get out and make sure that it's not just something that's here. It's not just conceptual. That's better than nothing for sure. But I mean, going out and trying to farm on day one's not exactly easy when you actually try to go do it. And so, I saw somebody on your chat here was saying, what would people do differently if they did know? Well, presuming that people were watching you and me, I would hope if they're watching us both, they already understand that they need to be doing as well. They need to be gathering food. They need to be trying some of these skills. They need to be trying to plant their own food. They need to be looking at where they are in the world. They need to be looking at who is around them in the world. They need to be listening and having the eyes to see, not only from a natural perspective, but from a spiritual one as well. And ain't everybody going to make it. And it's supposed to be that way. I've gone from wishing I could touch everybody's lives in the world to recognizing there's a lot of NPCs out here. Do you think your fans know what an NPC is?
Hell yeah, they do.
Okay. There's a lot of NPCs, and while I can guess at some of the reasons why they're here, I know for a fact that there's no way to reach a lot of them, and they're not meant to be reached. It's important that everybody takes it upon themselves to have the knowledge, to have the effort, to actually do what needs to be done, to eliminate the fear of change, to eliminate the fear of having to walk away from something, to eliminate the fear of listening to, if you want to call it God or intuition or fate or whatever you feel like calling it personally. This is where the adult versus the inner child comes in. And I'm seeing so many people's inner child win that battle. I don't know how else to say that.
I like to tell my kids and the people that I counsel with, life is hard and life is scary regardless of what you do. So you might as well do good shit. You might as well
Yeah.
get off the bench, get off the couch, and get out there and do something meaningful and impactful, because it's gonna be difficult. It's gonna be hard. It's gonna be outside of your comfort level, regardless of what it is that you do. And so, if you apply personal responsibility to the situation and realize the government's not my daddy, and nobody cares more about me than I do, and that it's my responsibility to provide for my wife and my children, and hopefully to leave everybody that I come in contact with better than when I found them. That means I have to go out and willingly engage in the world. I have to go do shit. We call this yod. It's the Hebrew letter yod. It looks like an outstretched hand, and it means works. It means do stuff. Yod. Bear, what's your statement of faith? Yod. Do shit. And if it's gonna be difficult and scary anyway, why don't I go do good shit? Right, and aim towards the highest possible objective that I can aim towards in this short period of life that I have. Because yeah, the poles could shift in the next 20 years and the world gets washed in water. Cool. I could also get hit by a bus tomorrow, right? That's entirely possible. And so in the meanwhile, why am I not actively choosing to do something meaningful and impactful with the time that I have, rather than sitting around and burning daylight? Our most precious resource is time, and most people don't get that. So, Ben,
yeah, you're making a great point there. And, if I can piggyback off of what you said while letting everyone know I agree with it completely, don't aim for quick and easy. Don't aim for comfortable. It's not supposed to be quick and easy. It's not supposed to be comfortable. Your place in the next age of Earth will be earned. Will be earned. And it'll be worth it.
Amen. I've really enjoyed talking with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
We should do it again.
I would love to. I'll shoot you an email after this and we can set that up. But dude, you're super knowledgeable. You're passionate. You are your voice is constantly in my home, thanks to my lovely wife. So I've enjoyed getting to spend some time with you. I know the Bear Nation has enjoyed it, since we share a large viewership. And kudos on the growth of your channel in the face of this YouTube bullshit world that we live in right now, to continue to be able to grow your channel and get your message out. That's inspiring to somebody like me, who's got a significantly smaller channel, to see that every day you are consistent. Every day you show up, every day you put the work in every day, and that we still live in a world where that matters and that pays off. And so I appreciate you being a good witness for that. And I appreciate your dedication to this subject and trying to educate people and wake people up. And I appreciate your time, man. Would you take the show out with your standard line that you use to close a show on Suspicious Observers?
Absolutely. And it's good advice for everybody. Eyes open, no fear. Be safe, everyone.
Love it. Bless y'all. Shalom.